"Try this rifle, civilian," the instructor said with a smirk, thrusting the weapon into the hands of a woman standing at the far end of the range. Her olive-drab hoodie was a size too big, her dark auburn hair tucked into a cap that shadowed her eyes. She had stood apart since day one, watching, listening, saying almost nothing. One of the recruits leaned over and whispered, "She used to be a field medic or something. Probably thinks you aim with a stethoscope." There were a few quiet chuckles. She didn't flinch. Didn't turn to defend herself. She only adjusted the sight on the DMR with the sort of efficiency that belonged to someone who'd done it hundreds, maybe thousands, of times. The rifle cracked. The target, set over 1,000 meters away, rippled with impact. Center hit. Perfect. The chuckles died instantly. An eerie hush blanketed the range. From behind the instructor's table, a weathered voice muttered, "That technique. That stance. That's Whitlock's form." Everyone turned toward the speaker, Staff Sergeant Blake, who had served in a dozen covert conflicts across 3 continents. His gray eyes narrowed. "Who the hell taught you to shoot like that?" The woman looked up, her cold green eyes emotionless. She didn't answer. Later that day, her name circulated in hushed tones, Harper Lane, 35 years old, civilian applicant for the logistics and trauma support role. No military background, no declared firearms certification. Just an efficient, quiet presence who rarely spoke and always seemed to know more than she let on. Harper wasn't like the others. The civilian training facility in Montana was built to rehabilitate and retrain former combat personnel for post-military careers, or occasionally prepare civilians for specialized support roles. Most of the attendees were gruff men with worn boots and louder stories, all vying to prove who they were or who they used to be. Harper wasn't vying for anything. She arrived early, stayed late. Cleaned the equipment room without being asked. Assisted injured recruits with silent efficiency. She wore no rank, but carried herself like someone who had worn more than one. Most dismissed her as the helper, or sometimes the med pack. Others called her Ghost Tech because she moved through the compound so quietly you'd forget she'd been there at all. Only a few noticed the habits. The way she always sat with her back to the wall. The way her eyes scanned the horizon during breaks. The way she never flinched, not even when startled by sudden noise or surprise drills. People underestimated her. She let them. It happened on a hot, dusty Thursday during the training compound's urban ops simulation. One of the younger recruits, new, barely 20, panicked during a staged ambush. His rifle kicked high, the muzzle striking the edge of his own shoulder as he tripped on debris. He screamed, blood pouring from an arterial gash near his collarbone. For a second, nobody moved. Even the instructors were stunned. The simulation had been routine until that moment. Harper was already running. She knelt beside him, removed his gear with speed and calm that shocked even the med team. Her hands didn't tremble. She applied pressure to the artery with the exact weight needed, dug gauze from her kit, and dressed the wound before the base medic even arrived. "Someone call medical," someone shouted. "I am medical," she said without looking up. Her voice was low. Even. Clinical. Later, Sergeant Dorsey, a former Marine with a loud mouth and a love for authority, gave her a nickname that stuck longer than he intended. "Well, damn. Look at that. Guess Nurse Terminator's got more than Band-Aids in that pack of hers." Harper said nothing. She never did. At night, long after the lights in the dorms had dimmed and the laughter had faded into silence, Harper sat alone in the med bay. It was the quiet that soothed her most. Not just silence, but control. Order. She moved like clockwork, sanitizing instruments, cataloging supplies, inspecting bandages and rechecking trauma packs. Her hands performed the work with a methodical, mechanical grace. On the far wall of the med bay, a small photograph rested in a cracked plastic frame. It showed a tall man with dark hair streaked with gray, wearing a high-altitude camouflage rig and a hardened look that came from seeing more than most should. His left hand rested on the shoulder of a teenage girl with a tight, unsure smile. The girl was Harper. The man beside her was Elijah Whitlock, legendary Special Forces marksman, vanished after a mission in northern Syria. Declared Kia. But to those who served with him, his name was spoken in reverence. And to Harper, he was more than a legend. He was her father. She didn't tell anyone that. She hadn't told anyone anything in a long time. She wore his watch on her left wrist, still ticking. Not a scratch on the crystal. Every night, before turning out the lights, she would press her fingers to it gently. Like she was waiting for a message only time could deliver. 2 days later, the facility ran a surprise breach and clear test. Instructors moved through mock buildings firing blanks, evaluating the recruits' ability to respond under pressure. Harper wasn't scheduled to participate. She had volunteered to inventory the armory. But as chaos erupted during the simulation, smoke bombs, simulated explosives, the crack of blank rounds, Harper quietly donned her protective vest and picked up a headset. Inside the fogged corridors of Building Delta, a recruit named Piers had lost contact with his squad. Disoriented, breathing too hard, barrels shaking in his hands. The staged hostiles were converging. He backed into a dead end. One of them rushed the hallway. A single rubber training round struck the enemy, clean between the eyes, knocking the helmet off with the impact. Piers turned, stunned, as Harper emerged from the smoke behind him, rifle steady, breath calm. She didn't speak. She just gestured for him to follow. They exited together. The instructors marked the simulation as a success, though they hadn't expected it. Harper never claimed credit. Never submitted a report. Later that evening, Piers approached her outside the med bay. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked softly. She paused, looking out over the tree line where the wind stirred the pine tops. "I was trained," she said finally. "A long time ago." Sergeant Dorsey started watching her after that. Not overtly. Not with suspicion. Just curiosity. He noticed the way Harper always chose the corner seat in the mess hall. How she timed her walking path to avoid unnecessary contact with others. How she never volunteered, but never refused. One morning, Dorsey strolled past her as she cleaned the firing pins from the squad rifles. "You know," he said, voice casual, "we get plenty of medics through here. But I've never seen one drop a moving target at 600 meters during a random simulation." Harper didn't look up. The wind was steady. It wasn't a hard shot. He raised an eyebrow. "You weren't on duty." She paused. People needed help. Dorsey knelt beside her, voice lowering. "You're not a civilian, are you?" She locked eyes with him for a long moment. Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm not a soldier either. Not anymore." That was the last time he questioned her. Harper had never spoken about the desert. But sometimes, in the dead of night, the wind through the pine trees would shift, dry and sharp, and she'd wake in a cold sweat, breath caught halfway between the past and the present. She remembered the sound of drone rotors overhead. The static of comms before they went dead. The sharp pain in her ribs when the third IED hit. And her father's voice, hoarse, steady, bleeding but unshaken, "You keep moving, Harper. You don't stop until the job is done." She had carried his body 4 kilometers through insurgent territory under full fire cover. Saved 3 other team members. Neutralized the sniper that killed him. None of that was in the records. The operation had been buried, sealed off, forgotten, and she had been given a choice: return to active field ops under a new alias or disappear. She chose the latter. The war was done. But the fight inside her never really ended. 7 sections complete. I'll continue in the next message with sections 8 to 12, progressing the narrative with richer world building, expanded secondary characters, and slowly building toward the reveal of her legacy. Let me know if you'd like any tonal shift or more character focus added as we go. 3 weeks into the program, whispers started to circulate. Nothing confirmed, just fragments. The instructors called her Mississippi Lane. But some said her real name wasn't Lane at all. A senior trainer, former ranger named Simmons, claimed he'd seen her years ago, in Syria. Not in a med tent, but on an overwatch ridge outside Aleppo. No, man. You're mistaken, another scoffed. That was Elijah Whitlock. Took that impossible 1,200-meter shot through a window slit. There were no women on that op. Simmons shook his head. I said what I said. The story grew teeth. Someone dug up grainy footage from an old drone archive, posted anonymously on the internal comms board. A still frame showed a lean figure, wearing a scarf and holding a sniper rifle, definitely a woman. The post disappeared within hours. But the question had already been planted in everyone's minds. At the end of the month, Sergeant Dorsey introduced a morale-boosting contest, a range competition, open to all staff and trainees. Winners would receive extra leave, a locker upgrade, and their name on the range leaderboard. Most saw it as a game. A few took it seriously. Harper didn't sign up. At least not officially. She was checking inventory at the range storage unit when Dorsey spotted her. Come on, Nurse Terminator, he called out with a grin. We're putting the barrels to the test today. You scared of a little paper target? Someone snorted. She'll probably shoot the medical tent instead. Harper stared at the rifle on the bench. M24, same base model her father trained her with, down to the custom cheek rest. Dorsey smirked. Unless, of course, you'd rather keep cleaning up the bandages. She stepped forward and said nothing. Just picked up the rifle, checked the action, and took a prone stance on the firing mat. No warm-up. No practice shot. She adjusted for wind, elevation, humidity, and fired once. The bullet hit not just center mass, but the exact intersection of the X and Y axes on the target, measured at 1,000 meters. The range fell into dead silence. Sergeant Dorsey's jaw worked for a moment before he muttered, well hell. That evening, Instructor Simmons approached her at the gear lockers. You knew Elijah Whitlock, he said. It wasn't a question. Harper didn't look up. He was my father. Simmons exhaled slowly. I served one op under his command. Just one. But I've never forgotten it. She remained silent, folding her vest. He once said to me, the quietest shooter is the one who already knows the outcome. You shoot like that. A pause. He's dead, isn't he? She nodded. Did you bury him? I brought him home. Simmons placed a single hand over his heart in quiet respect. Then you've already done more than most of us will ever manage. 2 weeks later, the base received intel from HQ, a scheduled Tier 3 simulation, live tactical, low-risk threat identification, meant to test facility readiness. It would include roleplay hostiles, counter-sniper units, and a medical response scenario. It was, officially, just a training exercise. But mistakes could be made. 3 recruits were scheduled for mock extraction training in Building Echo, far from the main center. Harper heard the briefing from her usual place, behind the equipment table, unseen, unremarked upon. But her ears caught one detail: the sniper units would be testing urban terrain visibility through fog deployment. Just like that night in Aleppo. Just like the op that took her father's life. An hour into the exercise, a comms glitch severed the simulated evac team from the trio inside Building Echo. From the operations tent, instructors debated protocol. No one wanted to break simulation. They insisted everything was under control, but Harper had seen the terrain layout. The roleplay snipers would reach Echo in under 10 minutes. She moved without speaking. Took the long route to the old admin tower, decommissioned but still structurally sound. She climbed 2 flights of stairs, dragging the field crate with her. Inside was the M24. She laid out the bipod, steadied her position, and read the wind. Distance, 845 meters. Wind, 12 knots, cross breeze from the north. Time, 3 minutes until the simulation team would be in view of Echo. Through the scope, she saw them moving, 3 camouflaged silhouettes weaving through the fog. She inhaled. "You don't fire to take a life," her father once said. "You fire to keep someone alive." The reticle slowed over the lead roleplayer's sensor plate. Harper exhaled, held, and squeezed. The shot cracked. Direct hit. Sensor flare registered. Simulation paused. Evac cleared. Echo building, safe. She packed up and disappeared before the instructors even arrived on site. Word traveled fast. By nightfall, whispers weren't just whispers anymore. Recruits shared the story with awe and confusion, that a civilian medic had stopped a hostile advance before the instructors could even intervene. Not during a training round. During a test meant to simulate real crisis. "She didn't miss," one recruit said. "Didn't even pause." Sergeant Dorsey, hearing the full report, made a rare trip to the old admin building. He climbed the same stairs she had. Saw the exact angle. Measured the distance with his rangefinder. He muttered a single word, "Damn." The next morning, he didn't call her Nurse Terminator. He said, simply, "Thank you." She nodded but didn't respond. 3 days later, an unfamiliar vehicle rolled into the base. Out stepped a tall man in worn command fatigues, silver eagles on his collar, Colonel Nathan Rourke, Special Activities Division, retired. He walked with a limp and a cane, but his presence made instructors straighten and fall silent. He didn't wait for introductions. He went straight to the med bay. Harper was sterilizing trauma kits when he entered. She didn't look up right away, but when she did, something in her face shifted, briefly. The colonel removed his cap. "Elijah was my friend," he said quietly. She didn't speak. "He told me you'd come here someday. Told me to let you find your moment." Harper stood still, her fingers gently tapping the old watch on her wrist. Rourke continued, "He said you'd do it not for medals, not for revenge. But because someone would need protecting." He handed her a sealed envelope. "His last message. Told me not to deliver it until you'd earned it on your own terms." She didn't open it. Not yet. After the simulation incident, everything changed. The base instructors, once dismissive, now gave her a wide berth, but with respect. The recruits changed too. They stopped talking over her. Started asking quiet questions. Approaching her in small groups during downtime. One night, a group of them sat with her outside the range house. The youngest, a wiry kid named Reeves, looked nervous. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been jerking my shot on trigger pull. They say to breathe right, but what does that actually mean?" She studied him for a moment. Then knelt in front of him, motioned for his rifle. "Show me your grip." He did. "Now watch your feet. One too far forward, adjust." She gently realigned his elbow. "You breathe in. Then halfway out. Hold it, not because you need to, but because it stills your heartbeat." She handed the rifle back. "Now do it again. But feel it this time." He obeyed. The shot cracked. Center target. Reeves stared at the scope, stunned. How did you?" "I didn't shoot," she said, rising. "You did." They started calling her Coach Lane. Not sarcastically. Not out of irony. It was a nickname spoken with quiet admiration. No one made it official. No one asked permission. She never led formal classes. She never stood behind a podium. But day by day, recruits began showing up near her maintenance station. They'd stand by while she cleaned equipment, quietly waiting for advice. She'd make small corrections: grip, posture, breath timing. And when someone got it right, she'd nod once, say, "That's better," and go back to her work. She didn't talk about her past. But her impact spoke volumes. That night, Harper finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note in her father's precise script. "Harper. If you're reading this, then you've stepped into the moment I always knew would come. Not because you were forced. But because you knew someone needed to be protected. I never trained you to be the best shot. I trained you to be ready. Not every life we save gets remembered. But every one of them matters. You kept your promise, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. Dad." She didn't cry. But she did sit for a long time in silence, holding the letter with one hand, and the watch with the other. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. It snowed lightly that morning. A thin veil of white dusted the rooftops of the facility buildings, muting footsteps and dulling the clang of the range bell. Harper sat alone near the fire barrel just outside the equipment shed, steaming tea in her gloved hands. Sergeant Dorsey approached quietly, wrapped in a thermal jacket and carrying 2 cups of coffee. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood beside her and stared out at the white horizon. "You've changed the air around here," he said finally. She raised an eyebrow. "Used to be every recruit here talked about scores. Medals. War stories. Now all they talk about is breath control, patience, that thing Coach Lane said. Even the cocky ones are watching how you move." Harper took a sip of her tea, eyes never leaving the Trilene. "They'll forget." "Maybe," he said. "But not all of them." He set the extra cup beside her and walked away. 3 nights later, just before lights out, the base alarm wailed. Not a drill. Not a simulation. The southern sensor line had triggered a real breach. Instructors scrambled. Recruits were ordered to bunkers. The security team raced toward the ridge. Harper moved differently. She didn't run. She didn't panic. Instead, she opened the weapons locker with a key few knew she even had, selected a suppressed rifle she'd cleaned a dozen times but never fired here, and walked briskly toward the east-facing comms tower. It was the only elevated position with a clear view of the Southern Valley Trail. By the time she reached the platform, she was already sighted in. Through her scope, movement. 4 figures, in dark gear. No insignias. No thermal tags. Not a simulation. Real. Through the headset she kept stashed under the console, Harper opened a direct line to the base command. "This is Lane. I have eyes on 4 unknowns approaching from Sector South 4. Confirmed live threat. Advise?" Static. Then the voice of Colonel Rourke, "We read you. Nearest security team is 10 minutes out. Contact in 3, Harper said. Do not engage until positively threatened." Harper didn't answer. Her breathing slowed. The rifle settled into her shoulder. She tracked their movements, coordinated, methodical. Too smooth for random hikers. These were professionals. Scouting formation. Covering arcs. She focused on the lead figure. Chest plate. Slight tilt. Carrying suppressed weapon. They're not here to scout. They were here to test defenses. Or worse. She placed the crosshairs on the outer edge of the lead's hip joint, a disabling shot, not lethal. She waited. 30 seconds. They raised optics. One of them aimed toward the inner perimeter gate. That was the moment. The bullet struck exactly where she intended, just below the hip plate. The figure crumpled with a sharp cry and dropped their weapon. The rest scattered. Flashlights came alive, but not upward, they weren't expecting fire from above. Harper didn't shoot again. She switched frequencies. This is Lane. 1 hostile down, 3 scattered. Recommend containment squads now. Northbound on foot. Colonel Rourke's voice came back, security is mobilized. Do not pursue. But Harper was already dismantling her rifle. By the time the first team arrived at the ridge, Harper was gone. Only footprints remained on the snowy metal of the comms tower platform. The next morning, the facility was on lockdown. The 4 intruders had been detained. All former contractors. No tags. No traceable employer. 1 injured, stabilized in the medical wing. Dorsey briefed the recruits. This wasn't just a breach. Someone sent these guys to probe our readiness. In hushed tones, the instructors discussed how the base had been seconds from full compromise. No one said it officially, but everyone knew, Harper Lane had saved them again. Colonel Rourke requested her presence in his office that evening. She arrived quietly, hands clasped behind her back. You didn't wait for my command, he said. No. You could have missed. I didn't. He nodded. You understand this will raise questions. From command. From people who've been trying to forget your name. Harper met his gaze. Let them ask. He studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. You're still not interested in coming back to active duty? I'm already doing what matters, she said softly. I'm teaching them to think before they pull the trigger. That's what he wanted. Rourke tapped the edge of his desk. Then stay as long as you want, Coach Lane. This place is better with you in it. The official investigation began 2 days later. Not by the base's own staff, but by a pair of external agents flown in from Joint Command. Polite, professional, and clinical in their speech. They reviewed security footage, questioned instructors, and made note of Harper's unsanctioned movement during the breach. One of the agents, Evans, stood at the window of Colonel Rourke's office, flipping through a printed personnel file. This Lane woman, no military service number. No combat record. No formal weapons certification. She's a civilian applicant, Rourke replied. Evans raised an eyebrow. Who neutralized a professional infiltration team using a suppressed sniper rifle and predictive movement patterns. Rourke said nothing. Evans continued, and you're telling me she's just here to restock medical kits? The colonel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Sometimes the best teachers wear no rank. Harper was called in for a conversation. The agents asked polite questions at first, background, training, former occupations. She answered minimally. Nothing inaccurate, but nothing illuminating either. When they tried to press further. Who trained you? My father. Elijah Whitlock? Yes. They glanced at each other. He was officially declared Kia 8 years ago. I brought him home. More silence. One of the agents asked, are you aware that using a military-grade weapon without command authorization could be considered a breach of protocol under? Harper met his eyes. Would you rather I waited until they reached the barracks? That ended the interview. They didn't formally reprimand her. But they made one thing clear, Harper Lane was no longer invisible. Word of the investigation didn't stay quiet. By the end of the week, dozens of recruits had signed a handwritten letter, presented directly to Colonel Rourke. The message was simple. Coach Lane is not a threat. She's the reason we're learning more than just protocol. We trust her more than we trust some of the officers here. If she's forced out, we walk. It wasn't an organized rebellion. There were no protests. No shouting. Just names. Voices in ink. Some of those names belonged to prior combat vets. Others were first-timers hoping for a shot at the next level of training. Rourke read every signature. then folded the letter and placed it into his drawer without a word. That night, Rourke found Harper in the equipment shed, methodically reassembling a jammed breech loader. "You've become something of a cult figure," he said, half amused. Harper didn't look up. "That's not why I'm here." He nodded. "I know." He stepped forward. "Command won't push you out. But they will watch you now. Probably always." "I expected that." "I need to ask," Rourke's voice lowered. "Why this place? You could have gone anywhere. Why here? With kids barely learning how to fire clean." Harper finally looked up. "Because I can stop them from becoming what I almost became." Rourke's expression shifted. She continued, her voice steady. "The first time I held a rifle, I thought it was the answer. The last time I used it in war, I realized it was the question." A pause. "I want to help them ask better questions." Rourke didn't reply right away. When he finally did, it was just one word. "Good." 2 weeks passed. Snow melted. Routines returned. But Harper didn't relax. Something had changed. The breach wasn't just a test of readiness, it had been coordinated. She began walking the perimeter more frequently, noting small changes, a disturbed wire here, a set of tracks masked under melting frost. Whoever had sent the infiltration team wasn't finished. One evening, during a quiet rotation near the southern fence line, she found a message etched into a fallen tree with a blade. "Next time, you won't see it coming." Harper stood silently, eyes fixed on the words. Then, slowly, she pulled the watch off her wrist, opened the back casing, and slipped out a hidden memory card she hadn't touched in years. The only file inside was labeled Whitlock Alpha.exfil 1. It was time to remember everything she'd locked away. Back in the med bay, long after lights out, Harper inserted the memory card into an encrypted device she kept hidden beneath the base's old infirmary floorboards. The screen blinked alive. A file opened, grainy drone footage and silent tactical logs from her father's last mission. Operation Warden Sand. The op had gone off script. What was supposed to be a recon ended with ambush, betrayal, and the team's extraction route deliberately sabotaged. Her father had stayed behind so others could escape. But Harper had gone back for him, disobeying a direct order. She carried his body out under sniper fire, through burning hills and wreckage. No recognition. No medal. Only silence. But the footage revealed something else. One of the operatives who had compromised the mission, was still alive. And Harper had just seen his face again, on one of the intruders during the breach. She pulled up archived dossiers. The man's name was Cade Sutter. A former SAD contractor, discharged dishonorably under sealed terms. But he hadn't disappeared. He had simply shifted into the gray, working for private black market entities, targeting outposts for intelligence and experimental data. Harper now understood, the breach wasn't about the base. It was about her. She had gone underground after her father's death, trying to live invisibly. But her shot on the comms tower had broadcast one message to anyone watching. She's still alive. Colonel Rourke found her in the training yard the next morning. "You've seen something," he said. "I know who was in that breach team." Rourke tensed. "How sure?" 100%. She handed him the flash drive. "This man helped orchestrate the ambush that killed my father. And now he's watching this place." Rourke cursed under his breath. "Command won't act unless he's actively threatening us." Harper met his eyes. "He already is." Harper gathered the senior trainees after dark. No official meeting. No orders. Just truth. "Some of you think I came here to escape something," she began. "I didn't. I came here because I know what happens when young soldiers are taught to obey without understanding. To fire before they think. To forget the cost. She let that hang in the air. There's someone watching this base. A man I should have stopped years ago. He's not after you, but he'll hurt you to get to me. She looked around the group. If you want out, take the next bus. No shame in it. But if you stay, know this, I won't let anything happen to this place. Not while I'm still breathing. No one left. Not one. 2 nights later, it began. Power flickered across the compound. Security feeds glitched, then blacked out entirely. A faint hum, like a signal jammer, buzzed through the air. Then, explosions. Not real ones, shock charges. Disruptive but non-lethal. Meant to scatter defenses and simulate chaos. Sutter's calling card. Harper grabbed her gear and sprinted to the armory. Rourke was already there, arming himself. North perimeter compromised. South gates holding. He handed her a suppressed rifle. He's coming. Probably wants to finish what he started. Harper checked the bolt. Then I'll finish it first. The base became a maze. Strobes from training simulations blinked eerily through the fog. Every hallway echoed with footsteps, some real, some not. Recruits moved in coordinated squads, defending bunkers and protecting civilians. Harper tracked the breach signals to the generator outpost. That's where she found him. Cade Sutter. Older, scarred, smug. He held no rifle, just a sidearm and a knowing grin. Didn't think you still had it in you, he said. That tower shot. Bold. Harper leveled her rifle. You shouldn't have come here. He shrugged. This isn't about you. It's about him. Elijah. He got in the way. You took what should have been my medal. Harper's voice was calm. You killed your team. I made a trade. You betrayed everything he taught us. Sutter raised his pistol. She fired first. The round hit center mass, vest protected him, but the impact drove him to the ground. He gasped, disarmed. Harper stood over him. You won't get another shot. Sutter chuckled weakly. You're just like him. No, she said softly. I listened when he told me to walk away. But as base security closed in, she didn't fire again. She handed Sutter over. Walked away. The incident was classified. The base restored. Command requested a full report from Colonel Rourke. He submitted a single sentence. Threat neutralized due to the decisive actions of Harper Lane, civilian advisor. Command tried to offer her a reinstatement. Special Ops. Full clearance. Any post she wanted. She declined. Again. I'm not a soldier anymore, she told Rourke. But I'll teach them how not to become killers. 3 months passed. A new group of recruits arrived. Younger. Less experienced. But sharper, more curious. On the first day, one of them asked, "Who's that lady with the green eyes?" Another answered, "That's Coach Lane. She used to be a medic or something. She any good? I heard she took down a hostile team during a storm. Alone. Really? Yeah. But she never talks about it." They watched as she adjusted a trainee's posture by 2 degrees. The kid hit bullseye. Harper never spoke of the war again. She didn't need to. Every breath, every quiet correction, every young shooter who paused before they pulled the trigger, was part of her legacy now. One day, Sergeant Dorsey stopped by the range. "You're not a ghost anymore," he said with a half-smile. She tilted her head. "No. No. You're what the ghosts whisper about." That night, as snow began to fall again, Harper sat in the med bay. She pulled the old watch from her wrist. Set it on the table beside her father's letter. For the first time, she let herself cry. Not from pain. but from the deep, resonant feeling that she had kept her promise. Not just to him, but to herself. On the last page of her father's letter, in faded ink, was one final line she hadn't noticed before. The most powerful shot is the one you don't take, because you've already taught someone else how not to fire. She folded the letter and smiled. She understood now. Some legends shout. Others whisper. But the ones who last are those who teach without fanfare, protect without glory, and shape the future without ever needing their names remembered. Harper Lane never asked to be known. But every soul who passed through that training base carried a piece of her quiet legacy with them. A breath before the shot. A decision to protect, not destroy. A voice remembered in silence. And that was enough.